I don't know if you have noticed this, but it does seem as though every single company that exists is racing to announce their AI strategy. Banks and law firms and retailers and your dentist's office probably has an AI-powered scheduling system. Like, AI is everywhere. And the awkward thing about talking about AI here this morning while we're working through the book of Joshua is that the stories we are reading keep mentioning a town spelled with the letters A and I, so that even Kate beforehand was like, how do I pronounce this? Is it AI? Is it I? And so we have to somehow keep this straight. So know that I'm probably, for the next few minutes, talking about artificial intelligence, AI, except for when I'm talking about the destroyed Canaanite town of Ai. Got it? That's pretty straightforward. Easy to keep track of. So, here's what's actually happening with all of these companies, sort of suddenly discovering their AI strategies. I know a couple business owners, and I have heard them say they don't want to actually have to develop this. Not really. They're doing this because they are convinced that AI is going to become necessary for all work in ways that they aren't quite sure how to adapt to, and so they're trying to figure it out. And so you get the sense that a lot of companies are scared. Nobody wants to be the company, right, caught flat-footed while the whole ground underneath shifts, the industry. Nobody wants to refer back to a sermon from several weeks ago, to be Blockbuster, left in the dust, left behind in irrelevance by Netflix. So everybody is jockeying for position fast, whether they believe in AI or not. But this actually isn't really a story about new technology. It is a familiar story that unfolds again and again in new domains. It's really a story about power and about fear, and it's a story about what happens when everyone senses that the wind is blowing a certain direction, and when things are not looking good, and you need to protect yourself. And this is exactly what's happening in the passage we just heard read in Joshua chapter 9. The wind is blowing in the book of Joshua. Jericho falls. Not to be confused with AI, falls, the other AI. And Joshua 9 opens with a collective reaction to the wind. 9 verses 1 and 2 says, as soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan heard this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. Every king, every group of people, they come together, they're united. These are kings and peoples who historically did not like each other. They were really like large cities, but every city had a king. And the reason they all had their own kings was that, again, they didn't like each other. And so they were constantly separated. But these kings, they see what's happening. They can see what's coming. And so they realize, well, we're better together. And so they join forces together as one. There really is nothing like a big scary enemy to bring enemies together. And what can be scarier than a God who seems unstoppable and is on his way towards you, threatening you and your way of life? Joshua 9, it is telling the story in narrative form that we actually find in other places throughout the Bible, sometimes poetically. Actually, we sang it this morning. Psalm 2 teaches us through song and this question: why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed. The Bible tells us this is a constant story unfolding in the world. That the nations don't just rage randomly, they rage because they feel threatened, especially against the King of Kings, the God of the universe. They sense that there is someone bigger, there is someone stronger, and there is someone winning, and it isn't them, and they're in danger. And the Bible tells us that this is one of the core dynamics at work in the world. And so just notice, right, in the news, in the world, what happens when a leader feels threatened. Nations rage, kings plot, and we'll hold on to that because we'll come back to it as we get to the end of our passage. But first, I want to introduce you to a completely different group of people, the Gibeonites. They're strange for so many reasons. They hear the same news that everyone else has heard, that Jericho has fallen, that Ai is gone, but their reaction is not to rage. They don't join forces with all of the people who are getting stirred up in anger and want to fight. They come up with a different plan, a sneakier plan. And there are some Hebrew Bible scholars who have suggested that actually the key difference between the Gibeonites and all of the other ites, the groups whose names end in ite, and they all get mad, but the Gibeonites don't, is that the Gibeonites don't have a king. At least no king is mentioned, and some think that there's something to this. What happens to a people who gather themselves around a single exalted ruler? I don't know, that's a good question to take with you into your study. But for now, just notice that the Gibeonites, they don't have any interest in fighting. They sense that fighting is suicide. So instead, they get shrewd. They dress up as travelers from a distant country. They're wearing worn out sandals. They carry with them moldy, crumbly bread, cracked, patched wineskins. They put together an Ocean's 11 style con, an elaborate, well-researched deception. And it works. I mean, this is the crazy thing about this story. It works. Joshua and the leaders, they taste the bread, they check the gear, they make sure that, they're telling the truth, and they make this covenant, this treaty of peace with these people who are deceiving them. And here's what's really easy to miss. The Gibeonites aren't just clever and creative. They're biblically literate. Israel's own law, back in Deuteronomy, it makes a distinction. Nations that are far away, you can offer peace treaties with them. But it's only the nations within the land who fall under total judgment, and they are supposed to be destroyed. And the Gibeonites somehow know this distinction, that if they are from far away, they're going to be fine. And so this is the loophole that they are building their entire disguise around. And it means that they understand Israel's scriptures well enough to then build a plan on it. And this is the uncomfortable part of the story. The Gibeonites, they sound a lot like a character in a story that Jesus tells. Jesus tells a story in the Gospels, in the Gospel of Luke, Luke 16, about a dishonest, shrewd manager. And this manager is about to get fired. And when he finds out he's about to get fired, he goes and he makes all of these back deal arrangements in order to set himself up for the future. And Jesus doesn't say, go and do likewise. He doesn't say, go and do what that guy did. But he does say, the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. Meaning, the dishonest, deceptive, self-interested guy looks around and he reads the room. He reads the situation more accurately than the honest people around him. And the Gibeonites are that. That's exactly what they're doing. They look around, they see what God is up to, they understand the situation, they are in trouble, and so they use what they know to their advantage. And some translations use the word cunning, others use the word crafty. It doesn't matter which one you like, they both have a sort of sinister connotation to them, right? But they see clearly. They have an accurate view of God's power. And so, knowing what they know, they do their best to take advantage of the situation. And I was trying to think of an illustration of this, and I was thinking about really what happened with Amazon a number of years ago, sort of at the beginning of Amazon's move to all-powerful. Everyone was afraid. Bookstores started going out of business. My favorite bookstores went out of business. I was bummed and sad. Big box chains started going under. Many brands, mall brands, started to go out of business. Everyone was trying to figure out a way to compete with Amazon. But how do you compete with free shipping and lower prices? But not everyone went under. There are companies that survived, and they survived by they stopped trying to beat Amazon, right? What did they do? They joined Amazon. They became third-party sellers inside Amazon's own marketplace. And so at a time when Amazon looked like it was an unstoppable force and everyone and everything was going to be consumed by them, the ones who understood they couldn't fight it shrewdly moved to get on the inside before they got ran over. That's the Gibeonites. Not really noble. We're honest, but effective. But also, actually, what's interesting about the Gibeonites is that they're not too proud to humiliate themselves. Because if you think about their plan, their entire plan is a confession of sorts. Yahweh is too powerful for us, and it's better to try to be on Yahweh's side than to be against him. And that's what their entire plan is to try to figure out how to get on his side. And this is a weird question, but have you ever actually seen someone come to Jesus this way? Where maybe it wasn't God's love and sacrifice that drew them, but they sort of had a sense of the truth. That Jesus is the only way, that he truly is the King. And so maybe at the beginning, they reluctantly submitted their life to him and only later came to love him. I've got a story for you about that before we finish in a little bit. But before we get there, I want to contrast the Gibeonites with Israel. Because right before our passage starts, the end of chapter 8, Joshua gathers all of the Israelites around. And they build an altar to Yahweh, just as was commanded in the book of the law of Moses. And there, Joshua is busy copying the law of Moses in order to make sure that the people have another copy and they have it available to them. And Joshua speaks blessings over the people, blessings straight from the law. And then he reads all of the words of the law to them. We're told every single word was read to them, to all of Israel. So, if over the many years since Moses first gave it to them, it's been a while since they've heard what God wants of them, they no longer have that excuse. They have heard it. They now know exactly what they are supposed to do. And so we come into chapter 9 with the Israelites having clarity around what's required of them. They know that they are supposed to distinguish between those who live in the land of Canaan and those who live far away. But when the Gibeonites come to them, the Gibeonites are more shrewd than the sons of light, the Israelites. The Gibeonites, they turn to God's law to figure out their plan. And while the Israelites have access to the same law, they also have the very presence of God with them. the Israelites do evaluate the Gibeonites' claims, taking some of their provision, right? So the men of Israel took some of their provisions, we're told. And then, there is no and then. It's a but. They did not ask counsel from Yahweh. And this is really the hinge of the entire story. A couple chapters ago, there was a man named Achan. Chapter 7, Achan knew the command from God and he defied it on purpose, right? He wanted what God said doesn't belong to him, and he took it without anybody seeing, and he hid it secretly. And the Bible refers to this as high-handed sin. If you think of a small child who raises their fists at you, right? I mean, this is the idea. Like, they do it in your face, looking at you like, I am doing this. I know I'm not supposed to. Within Israel's sacrificial system, there is actually no sacrifice available to deal with this kind of sin. But in this story, Israel's sin is not that kind of sin. Because Israel isn't hiding anything. They aren't driven by disordered desires. They're not serving themselves. They're actually trying to put into practice what God has asked them to. They're trying to discern. They're just naive, a little foolish. They check the evidence that the Gibeonites have given them, the bread and the sandals, and they conclude that the situation is obvious enough that I guess we don't need to ask God about it. He's already told us what to do, and we've kind of figured it out. The law is clear, right? They know God's will. And so you can make peace with people from far away, and these people are from far away. They know the command, they just don't think it applies here because these dishonest, shrewd neighbors have pulled one over on them. This is a very specific kind of failure, and maybe it resonates with you. This is like one of the most human failures. To mean well and to just make the wrong decision because we forgot or didn't think to just ask God what he thought of the situation. How easy it is for us to just say, I don't need to pray about this one. It's obvious. Brings us back to the nations and their kings. The king of Jerusalem hears that Gibeon has broken ranks with all of the neighbors, that they've made peace with Israel. And so he does what all of the kings did at the beginning of chapter 9. He gathers all of the kings together, and now instead of Israel, they're going after Gibeon. It's the same pattern, same Psalm 2 instinct. The nations rage again because they feel threatened. And it's not against Israel this time, but it's against anyone who dares to align with Israel's God. Aligning with Israel's God is always kind of dangerous business because it threatens the patterns of the world. And so 5 kings and their 5 nations, they march against Gibeon, and Gibeon sends men running to Joshua saying, save us, like help us. This all happens in chapter 10. And just of what you know of the story right now, what you know of what the Gibeonites did, what you know of what the Israelites did, if you don't know the story yet, because you haven't read it, like, what would you guess, like, would happen following it? How does God treat the Gibeonites, these dishonest and shrewd people? What does God think about the peace treaty that his people made with them? This is one of those shocking moments in the Bible where God honors it. God honors it. And in the same way that Rahab and her family, who were Canaanites set apart for destruction, have now become part of the family of God, God treats these Gibeonites who deceived their way in He treats them as though they are now his people as well. God honors the oath that his people made, and God, he fights to protect this covenant, this promise that Israel was never supposed to make in the first place. And it's just, I think it's worth sitting with that for a minute, because it reminds us that God doesn't need Israel's perfection, their perfect discernment. He doesn't need their discernment to be flawless in order to accomplish his purposes. It's interesting. We don't know what God would have said to the Gibeonites had the Israelites just asked. We don't know what God would have said to the Gibeonites if the Gibeonites had just come and said, listen, we know that you're supposed to take us out, but we're not going to fight, and we just want to be part of you and your life and your God. Your God is our God. Your people are our people. What would God have said? They don't do that. And yet God defends them anyway. He builds on this covenant rather than voiding it. And we're told that the Gibeonites continue to serve Yahweh, carrying wood and water to God's sanctuary for hundreds of years to follow. As we think about what this means for us, how this story might shape us, shape our imagination, shape our lives, I think there's some obvious low-hanging fruit. And the first thing to note is, right, God doesn't need our perfection to accomplish his purposes. This is such good news, and this is so freeing, right? Because God will save his people, and he will defeat his enemies, even when we fail to tell the difference between them. There are so many people who never say yes to God, who never serve God, don't share their faith with their neighbor, they don't start a ministry that God has put on their hearts, they don't show up at their neighborhood school or just do something because they're so afraid of making a mistake, of saying the wrong thing, of somehow making God angry, when God is just eager to see you trust him and go and say yes and do your best and follow his Spirit. And so this story, it reminds us that Israel made mistakes. You might mess up when trying to serve God, but God is God, and you are not. And he's bigger than your mistakes, and he always has been, and he always will be. The second bit of low-hanging fruit for us is we are called to be shrewd and innocent, not naive. And Jesus says it directly, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. The reality is people are sinful. Spoiler alert, did that surprise you? Right? Reality of living in the world is that there are people who will try to take advantage of you. And Israel's example shows us what happens when sincere people who know what is right and wrong actually skip the step of actually asking God for input because the situation looks obvious. Melody leads our benevolence team. We have a team in our church who has access to our collective resources, some amount of money that we've made available for people with immediate needs. And we have a policy in place, and that policy guides some of the decisions. But just this week, I was listening as Melody described her and the team's heart for this policy, as they basically said, it doesn't matter what the need is, we pray about them all. And I'm like, yeah, Joshua says that's what we should do. But just the sense that even if we think we know, we still ask God for guidance and direction, trusting that he just always knows best. And this is also the reason why the first core practice of our neighborhood groups is daily prayer. It's the reason why our neighborhood efforts are built around daily prayer. And the dream is that this would be daily prayer together, that we would be praying with other believers in our neighborhood every single day, because it's not enough for us to just go around doing good work. But prayer makes sure that our work is grounded in the heart of God and the guidance that God provides. It's just too easy, right, to think we know the situation and to skip the step where we ask counsel from the mouth of Yahweh. Third, opposition is often, you could say sometimes, a sign that something is actually happening. Psalm 2 gives us a pattern that shows up twice just in this story, because in the world, when God wins, what Paul describes as the powers and the principalities, they react. It's a cause and effect. It's just what they do. We see it in the life of the church, both in the New Testament and then after. As emperors in the world, as regional rulers would get jealous of the church. You can hear it in some of the writings of rulers in the ancient world. Christians were busy living out the kingdom of God in these radical ways. And what was happening is that communities were being transformed. The church was changing people's lives so dramatically that the emperors, these regional rulers, were angry and jealous that people were shifting their loyalty, their allegiance to the Christians' God. Rather than them, they were just saying, church is way better at meeting my material needs and at providing real peace and protecting us than you are with all of your empty promises. And so rulers get mad and they fight back. And for the first couple hundred years of the church, there were a lot of Christian leaders who suffered and died as the nations raged. We shouldn't feel surprised that if we make a real difference in our neighborhoods, differences that actually change the patterns of life, this will feel threatening to some. And when people feel threatened, they lash out, they attack. Unless they are like the Gibeonites, then they might not fight God. They might instead try to come to God with some fear and some trembling. I want to share a story that resonated with me a long time ago. You may have read one of his books or heard him talk, but a guy named Lee Strobel, the way that he came to faith is fascinating to me. Because he was a journalist and an atheist. And one day his wife came home and said, I am now a Christian, a follower of Jesus. And he said, we should have talked about that first. He was angry. He was furious about it, in part because he knew that was going to change his entire life. He was terrified of what that might mean for his marriage if they didn't share this. And so he set out to do what he does for a living. He spent nearly 2 years interviewing scholars and historians and scientists, fully expecting to gather enough evidence to go to his wife, present her with the evidence, and prove that her whole new worldview was a myth. That was the goal. Instead, the investigation went the other direction. The evidence that he found of the resurrection, the reliability of the Gospels, it just kept building a case he couldn't argue his way out of. And eventually, the same journalist who set out to disprove Christianity ended up learning exactly what he needed to do to find himself saved by God. And he found himself on his knees, and he trusted Jesus for his life and salvation. And what's interesting to me about his story is that Lee didn't come to Jesus out of like pure devotion or attraction. No, he came out of fear and suspicion and a desire to protect his family. And he was shrewdly trying to save his life. And God met him there. Lee's story feels like the Gibeonite story in so many ways. Motives that start out self-interested and even hostile, but God didn't disqualify it. God used it. And as we move into our neighborhoods, I think we should be ready. I think we should be ready for people to come to us with bad motives. People who may even want to take advantage of us. And not because they want to fight God, but because they're scared or worried or afraid, and they just want to protect themselves. They just want to feel secure. And sometimes that instinct is the first honest step toward God. Psalm 2 doesn't end with the kings raging. It ends with an invitation for all of us. Psalm 2 sings, "Kiss the Son. Blessed are all who take refuge in him." Kiss the Son of God. It's a way of speaking of royalty. Honor the Son of God. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. Even the Gibeonites, who showed up for all the wrong reasons, ended up taking refuge with Yahweh, and they were permanently enfolded into Israel's life and worship. And today, the question in front of us is whether, it's not whether everyone's reasons for showing up in our neighborhoods are pure enough. It's whether we're actually listening closely enough to God. Whether we're actually asking God to help us recognize what he's doing in us, with us, and around us.